Okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to this very hot meeting of the Cabinet tonight. So for the public record, we have the majority of Cabinet members present, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves in a bit, and a number of senior officers present in the room. Some non-Cabinet members and additional officers will also be joining us virtually. I do have a note of any attendees and speakers who've indicated that they wish to speak, but if any virtual attendees do wish to speak, they can indicate with the yellow hand icon and we will pick this up in the meeting. So this meeting is being streamed live and recorded by the Council for subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site. So if we can just go around the room, and I'll ask the Cabinet members to introduce themselves and please state their portfolios for the benefit of anyone watching online. So if I can start to my right.
Mike Hakata, Cabinet Member for Climate Action, Environment and Transport and Deputy Leader.
Julie Davis, Cabinet Member for Communities and Civic Life.
Yeah, Ruth Gordon, Cabinet Member for Council House Building, Placemaking and Development.
Councillor Dana Carlin, Cabinet Member for Housing, Private Renters and Planning.
Councillor Sarah Williams, Cabinet Member for Finance and Local Investment.
Adam Jogi, Economic Development, Jobs and Community Cohesion.
Lucia Desneves, Health, Social Care and Wellbeing.
Zina Brabazon, Cabinet Member for Children, Schools and Families.
Thank you. And I believe we've got apologies from Councillor Chanwani.
Yes, Chair, we've got apologies from Councillor Seema Chanwani.
Thank you. Any urgent business?
No items of urgent business, Chair.
Thank you. Can I ask if any Cabinet members have any declarations of interest to make tonight? Okay, no declarations of interest. So if I can move on to item 5, which is the notice of intention to conduct business in private. So this agenda item does contain exempt items that's set out at item 16, which is the exclusion of the press and public. There were no representations received at the agenda publication stage in relation to the exempt item on the agenda. So if we can move on to item 6, which are the minutes. Can the Cabinet please confirm and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of June as a correct record? Thank you. Item 7, matters referred to Cabinet by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Are there any items to consider? No items to consider. Okay, item 8, there were no deputations, petitions or questions received. So if we can move to item 9, which is the 2021-22 finance update and provisional outturn. And if I can go to Councillor Williams to please introduce the report.
Thank you. You will see the report confirms the Council's general fund effectively came in on budget, and as forecast throughout the year, the direct impact of COVID was fortunately largely offset with government support, and the base budget pressures in the end were able to be offset, but not without the full application of the corporate contingency budget. This has enabled the Council's general reserve to be maintained intact, but without the need to draw down the planned 1.8 million from the strategic budget planning reserve. This is important as many of the pressures felt during 21-22 will inevitably continue into the new year, with the social care budgets in particular continuing to see high demand coupled with increased placement and other costs. The impact of inflation is going to create further budgetary pressures for both the Council and our communities. Having been able to maintain counter reserves at similar levels to prior years provides a further level of resilience on top of the growth that was added to the 22-23 budgets. Now, the new year is going to require a tight financial grip from the outset, with around 20 million savings to deliver. The effects of COVID are still being felt, and we're in an extremely challenging economic landscape and uncertainty about the level of government funding that's going to be available beyond 22-23. There are some good news stories in here, though. If you turn to the recommendations, I'd like to ask Councillor Zina Brabazon to speak briefly regarding our £1.28 million SAFE task force, that is support, attend, fulfil, exceed grant as set out in section 7.
Yeah, this is a good news story. The government have allocated 1.28 million of targeted funding for Haringey to tackle youth violence over the next 3 years. This task force is led mainly by schools. It's a schools-led project, but I'm very delighted to say that our Director of Children's Services will be chairing the SAFE task force over this 3 years, which I think is, if I might say, Leader, a vote of confidence in our children's services by our secondary schools in leading this as we work collaboratively together. There are the interventions that the SAFE Task Force is likely to include is expanding our primary transition outreach project, pilot project, which targets young people aged 10 to 11 at risk of exclusion, and looking at successful transition to secondary. And I am pleased to say exclusions are very, very significantly reduced in the borough. Expanding our secondary outreach project for young people at risk, with a focus on cognitive behaviour and approaches to support young people in managing behaviour. And this other very exciting project, which has been to expand the Social Workers in Schools scheme, which has had some national attention for the work it's done in the borough at some of our secondaries, and I believe we'll be expanding those to all our secondaries. Well, I'm looking at Anne in case that's incorrect, but I think that's the plan. So all in all, we do have a problem with youth violence in the borough, but at least the government has given us some funding for targeted interventions in our secondary schools, and we of course are delighted to take the government's money.
Thank you, Leader. Just to say, Councillor Brabozone's right in that our ambition is to extend social workers in schools to all schools, but we've not quite reached that position yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Does any Cabinet member have a question?
I'd just like to, with your permission, bring in Councillor Davis regarding the grant we've had from the Arts Council under the MEND programme.
Thank you. This represents a good news story for Haringey as well. The Arts Council England have awarded us almost £600,000 towards the upkeep and maintenance and restoration of Bruce Castle Museum. And we're looking at matching that, or more than matching it, to bring it up to a £1.531 million project to bring the building up to code. So we're very grateful to the Arts Council. It represents a level of confidence and interest in the museum that we very much welcome, and we hope that it will just be the beginning, really, of bringing Bruce Castle as a destination, a London destination, in absolutely tip-top condition.
No, that's it. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Is there any questions from any other Cabinet member? No? Okay. So if we can move to the resolution, which is to approve the recommendations as set out at page 15. Are we? Oh, apologies. Sorry, the heat's obviously getting to me. Councillor Connor, are you online? Have you got a question?
Yeah, I have indeed. Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions, so I'll ask them all in one go, if I hope that's okay. So the first question I have already speaks to comments that have already been made about the budget and the tight financial position. There was mentioned at 2.3 of the report there's going to be in around £20 million savings to deliver. It was noted also in the report that the priority for children had an overspend of 8.1 million, and the adults an overspend of 7.1 million, so roughly about £50 million. There were other overspends as well. So given that, and given the pressures that you've already identified in this report, do you think it's feasible to realistically look for £20 million savings? That's question 1. The second question is, the report makes reference to the dedicated school grant management plan, which is being shared periodically with the Department for Education. As this has been a problem area for the council, are you expecting it to become necessary to join the department's safety valve programme? And the third one is, how is rising inflation impacting council borrowing? Thank you.
Sorry, didn't hear the third question.
Councillor Connor, can you just repeat the third question?
Sure. How is rising inflation impacting the council's borrowing?
On your first question, I think it's reasonable to say that we, at the Q1, we will have a more realistic picture of whether those are realistic or not. And obviously we hope they are, those savings. But we can report back. On this potential safety valve, I think I'd like to bring in Anne Graham, if that's okay.
I have to say, I didn't clearly hear the question. If someone could repeat it for me.
My understanding is that, well, actually, it'd be easy for you to, Councillor Connor.
Sorry, yeah, apologies. I think I missed. I think the sounds a bit changed. I missed the first part of the answer. But the next question, I said the report makes reference to the DFG management plan, which has been shared periodically with the DFE. Given there's been a problem area for the council, are you expecting it to become necessary to join the department's, the department's safety valve programme?
Thank you, Chair. The council does have a DSG management plan, and the process with the DFE is that we enter into a negotiation with them about what we're going to deliver going forward. That work hasn't been done yet, and so I wouldn't want to give false assurance to the council at all. We do hope that the work that we put forward to the DFE will secure the best outcome for the council going forward, which will be a reduction in the overspend in year. The long-term overspend, while we work to reduce down the overspend in year. But there are no firm position on this yet for the reasons given. Thank you.
And on question 3, I will bring in Thomas in a moment, but just to say, of course, our borrowing is in different places, in different circumstances and over different terms. But obviously, with all the different borrowing, there are different levels of risk, but clearly high levels of inflation are a risk. But I think Thomas could bring some more detail.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Yes, so clearly inflation is a risk factor for us. As Councillor Williams has said, we will be providing more updates on the forward-looking financial position of the council in our Q1 report. This report is obviously a backwards-looking position at the outturn for last year. So yes, inflation does impact on both revenue and capital. It can potentially make capital schemes less affordable. It can put pressure on our revenue budgets. We're yet to understand the full impacts of the inflationary environment, but clearly it will impact on us, and obviously the wider economic impacts of the rising interest rate environment as well, which we will be reporting to the Corporate Committee on, given the Corporate Committee's remit in terms of Treasury management activity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if there's no more questions online, I can't see any. So no. Okay, so can we move to the resolution, please, which is to approve recommendations as set out at page 15. Are we all in agreement? Agreed. Thank you. Item 10, which is the proposals for resident engagement and participation, and this is following the insourcing of homes for Haringey. Councillor Carlin, can you please introduce the report?
I'm pleased to introduce this report, which sets out interim proposals to maintain the existing channels for engagement for tenants and leaseholders of the council. Homes for Haringey had the resident voice at the heart of decision making. Residents sat on the board, chaired the FRAC committee, sat on resident panels, and the scrutiny panel carried out excellent in-depth analyses of areas of service. Now that the ELMO has come back in-house, it is vitally important that we not only retain but increase the existing existing resident engagement. This paper proposes interim measures to ensure we have a holding position so that the current structures are able to continue. Sorry. These ensure that our tenants and leaseholders are able to actively participate in the work of the council as their landlord and to hold us to account. Our administration has an explicit commitment to co-produce and to hear the increasing voice of residents. The final proposals that are being developed will ensure even greater participation, and these interim proposals will allow us, as I said, to hold a holding position while any necessary changes to the constitution, etc., are able to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlin. Are there any questions from the Cabinet? Councillor Connor.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a question around the resident engagement process. I'm just wondering, there was a lot of detail around all the different schemes that were being proposed for residents to be engaged in, especially the customer call group. There was a lot of engagement, but I didn't see any sort of real power that would lie with residents in this proposal around sort of decision making. So is there any reassurance that can be given tonight that residents will actually have real power within these processes that's being brought up? And the second one is around will the council continue publishing targets and its performance against these targets as residents can continue to effectively scrutinise and engage with the council? Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't get the whole of that last
Can you just repeat the last one?
Yes. Will the council continuing publishing targets and its performance against these targets in a sort of open place so that residents can continue to effectively scrutinise the council? I know you've got a new scrutiny panel that's coming up. Is that just going to be part of that scrutiny panel, or is that going to be more widely available? Thank you.
Okay. With regard to the customer core group, this feeds into decision making of the council and actually does have quite a lot of power. The residents are very engaged and very determined to have their voices heard. So you can be reassured that yes, they do have a significant amount of power. In terms of publishing targets and the scrutiny panel, the recommendations of the tenant engagement panel, which the scrutiny panel will become, will be published on the website, and in addition, the housing scrutiny panel and OSC will also be able to ask for those recommendations to come to scrutiny. As I've said, this is an interim proposal, and we may move further. We may move forward with different different structures for scrutiny. But this will allow the current resident scrutiny panel to continue with their work. They do have a whole year's work planned out to continue with their work and to be able to feed their recommendations forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Can't see them on screen. Okay, so if we can move to the resolution, which is to approve the recommendations as set out at page 52. Are we all in agreement? Agreed. Everyone looks hot, I have to say. All right, so moving on to item 11, which is the partnering contract strategy for housing major works. Councillor Carlin.
Thank you. I'm pleased to recommend this ambitious procurement strategy. Going out to contract for periods of up to 10 years with 4 long-term partnering contracts covering distinct geographical areas will deliver a number of benefits to our capital build programme. This will enable increased resident involvement, reduce the costs and achieve substantial social benefits such as apprentices and supporting local supply chains. It will enable us to deliver our capital programme more effectively and hopefully with reduced costs. Currently, we procure individual contracts, but this does not produce the social benefits above and does not encourage contractors to become embedded and engaged in the Haringey community. Of course, contract management will need to be key on such long-standing contracts, and we will ensure that robust governance is in place to ensure the outcomes that are set out in the procurement strategy are achieved. Thank you. If there are any questions.
That's my line, Councillor Carling. Are there any questions? I've got to have something to do. Any questions from the Cabinet? No. Okay. Councillor Connor?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So that's a huge amount of money, the £800 million in a 10-year period. So my first question is around the oversight and monitoring of this. I understand you've got that 5-year break in it and the chance for other contractors to submit for different parts of the contracts if one contract fails. But because it's such a large amount of money in such a short space of time, do you see this actually only taking place within that 10-year period, or do you envisage that this might actually be a longer piece of that might take place over a longer time frame? And what guarantees or what sort of reassurances can you give residents that there is really robust oversight for this huge amount of money as part of this? The second one was on social value. You mentioned, maximising employment, training and social benefits to communities. I noticed in the report it said that you asked for a minimum requirement which contractors employ 1 apprentice per £1 million expenditure. I'm just wondering if sort of some really firm commitments can be brought up at an early stage within these, so that residents can see what we are holding these contractors to and what actual social benefits should be engaged with. This is not to take away from the residents' involvement in obviously determining what they want, but actually minimum that the council would like to see, because 1 apprentice per £1 million does seem quite low, and I just wonder if that apprentice drops out, does that then stop? Do they then need to bother to employ somebody else? And the final one is around the support for the residents. It's brilliant to see the co-production work that's gone into this. But I'm just wondering, is there room here to sort of have a specialist person supporting residents? Because they are going to be playing a reasonably, important role in this, especially around social value. And it would be really good to see that those residents are supported to be able to ask the right questions and to challenge contractors effectively. That's a hard ask, even for us as councillors. So I'm just wondering, is there going to be a dedicated support person for the residents in this role? Thank you.
Thank you, Pippa. Although 800 million is a lot of money, it is over a considerable period of time. And we have underspent and not actually fulfilled the work that we need to do under our capital programme in the last few years when the service was in Homes for Haringey. The capital programme is very important because it also reduces the number of repairs. We have a relatively old housing stock, and we need to bring our housing stock up to spec, really. And going out for this period of 10 years, although it is a lot of money, but it is over a long period of time, and we're already spending a considerable amount of money, but not necessarily getting the benefits that we're hoping to get through this procurement strategy. In terms of the, I will hand over to Judith, who will explain in more details about how we're going to be monitoring the contracts. Thank you.
Hi, so this is part of the tender strategy, and at the point the tenders come back, the proposals that the contractors provide will become part of their contractual obligations as part of the documents that that will make up their contracts. So they will come back potentially with slightly different offers on social value. In terms of your question about if an apprentice drops out, will we replace them? The idea is that there will be a constant stream of apprenticeships and training going on as part of this contract. In relation to your question around support for residents, we're in discussion, subject to approval this evening, about bringing in a team to support the procurement of this contract. And one of the areas of support will be an officer sort of dedicated to the sort of resident engagement on this contract and the training of them, because even if we're involving them in the procurement process, there'll have to be specific training to enable them to do that. So all that detail will be fleshed out in the next year or so as we bring that contract together, but we'll be looking at resourcing that going forward almost immediately to make sure we get that resident engagement right.
Thank you.
And if I can come in again on the apprenticeships, when you're going out for contracts, as we've been doing for individual pieces of work, up to 25 contracts a year, it's quite difficult to get our contractors to take on local apprenticeships for the long term, and this procurement process will allow us to do that, because these 4 contracts will be for 10 years, and there will be scope, as Judith says, for rolling training and apprentices within that, and that's what we are expecting to see delivered.
Thank you.
Going forward in terms of the training as well, Homes for Haringey in the past did train to quite a high standard the residents who were engaged at all levels of the organisation, and I would assume that we will do so going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? No. So if we can move to the resolution, which is to approve the recommendations as set out at page 75. Are we all in agreement? Come on, not long
Sorry,
left.
if I could I just come in with one more point?
We've just agreed it, Donna.
Oh, okay,
I think
sorry.
Councillor Pippa's fine. Thank you. We know you'll be taking it forward with a lot of commitments. That's good. Thank you. So moving on to item 12, which is the approval of the construction contract for council homes on land at Watts Close. And if I can ask Councillor Gordon to introduce, please.
It's a great pleasure to be here again, asking for approval for yet more council homes. Sort of feel like I'm doing this every time we have a cabinet meeting, but that is a good sign, because it just means that we have got a programme and we aren't just talking about it, we're actually pushing it forward and creating these homes that we desperately need in our borough. So although this is a relatively small scheme, all of these schemes cumulative are really an important part of the programme. So this is approval for a scheme for 18 homes, all of which will be at council rent. And importantly, they include large family size homes. So we've got included in those 18 are 4 3-beds and 2 4-beds. So, 6 family size homes. This is desperately what we need. 2 of the flats will be fully wheelchair accessible. The scheme, of course, is meeting all of our ambitions that we always say every time I come to this to the cabinet to ask for approval, that we, are very high on our agenda is the high quality of the build, that we are making sure that these schemes are not just about housing, but improving public realm, making sure that there are play spaces, making sure that there are public areas that residents can enjoy, and that is all part of this scheme. So obviously, just in terms of the technical requirements, we're asking for approval for the appointment of formation and for the technical requirement of appropriating the land for planning purposes, and to delegate the other authorities to the director with in consultation with myself as cabinet lead.
Thank you. Questions from the cabinet? Councillor Connor.
Hi, I've just got one question really. Because this is a council scheme and we have more ownership over it, is there a possibility, given that we're all suffering today with the high rising temperatures, but we've understood that in BBC website published today, in areas of London which especially had poor social housing areas, in that there wasn't enough green space to lower the temperatures, and we know that climate change is going to exacerbate the problem. is there opportunities to have actual green space within these developments going forward? Thank you.
Thanks. I wasn't sure whether that was a generic question about all of our housing schemes, but on the specifics of what's close, I would actually ask, I don't know whether David or Zoe is the Assistant Director here to answer some of the specifics about what's close.
Yeah, Robbie is on the call to answer specifics about the scheme, but I suppose just one thing I would say is all of the schemes that we're bringing forward have got a lot more soft landscaping and kind of things like green walls and brown roofs and those kind of things to encourage biodiversity and encourage the cooling as sort of integral parts of schemes. But if Robbie is online and available to come in and answer the specifics of the scheme.
Yeah, more than happy to answer. There is some play space as part of this development. There's also additional greening going into the estate. So this development's got urban greening factor of 0.52, which exceeds the London plan target, which is 0.4. It's also probably worth mentioning this is a zero carbon scheme as well. So this scheme is delivering a 106% reduction in carbon against building standards as well.
Sorry, Chair, is it right to ask a quick follow-up question?
Sorry, did you ask for a follow-up question? Yep, okay, go ahead.
So thank you. I've understood, having sat on the planning, about the green landscaping, and that's great, but it does look a little bit like concrete with some trees and bushes coming out of it. So I'm just wondering, given the, for people to be able to go outside who are living in flats onto a little patch of green space to put down a little picnic, or anything, just to sort of spend some time outside without actually having to sit on the concrete, even if it is under a tree. I'm just wondering if there's a new sort of incentive to actually get some more sort of actual green space in this development, obviously in future ones as well, but thank you.
Well, I hope I've made it sort of clear over, every time I've sort of come to the Cabinet with a scheme that we are absolutely pushing these schemes to the max in terms of creating green space and open space, and we're doing that. We have been, if you look at the Ashley Road development site that is coming forward, we are designing that specifically so that the neighbouring park sort of bleeds into the new housing development and turning a brownfield site into a very, very green site. And that's always our ambition on this. And, believe you me, I'm pushing more than anybody that we have got these, where we've got housing. You can't build houses without having some concrete. And that is true. But what we are doing is making sure that all of the public areas are, where we can put in soft landscape, and we're putting it in. Absolutely, we are pushing this to the max. We're all sitting here sweltering tonight. We understand what the climate agenda is totally in this borough, and we are making sure that we are contributing positively to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. So I don't think there's any more questions, but we will, the resolution will be considered in the exempt part of the meeting. So if I can move on to item 13, which is High Road West. And this is the appropriation of land in the early plots and consultation on the use of ground 10A of the Housing Act 1985. Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. So this is sort of the next stage really in the High Road West development scheme, which as you'll know is coming before planning this week. So obviously this is all contingent on the decision and planning. But in 2017 the council entered into a development agreement with Lend-Lease. As you know, last year there was a residents' ballot which voted in favour of the scheme. We always said that if the residents didn't vote in favour of the scheme, then that wouldn't go ahead. But they did vote in favour of the scheme. So we've had that validation from the residents. This next stage will see the delivery of the first part of that scheme. So that means that we will see the delivery of the first 60 council homes out of the 500 that we will get in the first phase. So if you like, this is phase 1 A, which will see that delivery of the 60 council homes. And we're also asking for what seems like a sort of technical, approval for a technical move, if you like, of further consultation seeking Secretary of State approval under the Housing Act, so that we can achieve vacant possession across the site. That will go out to consultation again with the residents. We are absolutely committed to, when we consult with the residents, that will always be an ongoing thing, but that we will do that with making sure that community languages are used, that translators are used on when we go out to consultation with these. So we are making sure that people understand what they are being consulted on, and that is part of our ongoing commitment for this particular scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Any questions from the Cabinet? No, and I believe Councillor Connor doesn't have any questions on this one. Is there anyone else online? No. Okay, so the resolution for this will be considered in the exempt part. Oh, sorry, I had in my notes that you didn't have a question. You do have a question. Apologies. Wasn't my mistake this time. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Very quickly, so Councillor Gordon, just obviously you talked about the consultation and the feedback from that consultation. Is there anything specific within this proposal you're asking residents particularly about? I wasn't quite sure, sorry, from reading the papers. And actually, if they give you any feedback, is there any capacity at this stage to change anything? It was just really to understand why that was happening at this point. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So what we'll be asking the residents is for us to be able to go ahead to apply to the Secretary of State for that permission. If I maybe ask officers to fill in, if it make it more, it's quite a technical requirement. So maybe if I could get officers to add to that. Mr. O'Brien, I think, is going to answer that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, to be honest, your answer is spot on, Councillor. This is a fairly technical process. As part of the legislation, we have to consult residents on the use of the powers. So we'll be asking residents their opinions on it, subject to what residents say and subject to consideration by members. We would then go on to apply to the Secretary of State. So it's a fairly technical consultation as far as it goes.
And there definitely are no more questions that I can see on script. No. OK. All right. So this resolution will be considered in the exempt part of the meeting. So if we can move on to item 14, which is the minutes of other bodies. Can Cabinet please note the minutes, please? Noted. OK. All right. Items of urgent business. I don't believe there's any new items of urgent business. Now, before we move on to exclude the press and public, I just wanted to say something about a colleague that will be leaving us. I believe it's Thomas's last meeting. Blame Andy, Thomas, he just reminded me. But just wanted to say a big thank you, and for that to go on record for all that you've done, and to wish you the very best in the future. I know you don't live a million miles away, so I'm sure we'll bump into you even at some point, but all the best, and thank you for everything. Little round of applause. Thank you. We move on to item 16, which is the exclusion of the press and public. So Cabinet will now consider items 17 to 20, which contain exempt information in relation to items 12, 13 and 6. So can I move that the press and public are excluded from the remainder of the meeting to consider this exempt information as defined under paragraphs 3 and 5, part 1, schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Is that agreed? Okay. So we'll just pause for the cameras to go off.